Hello, Grace. Welcome to Cover. Today is March 7th, and we are covering Numbers 25 and 26. Yesterday, we learned about the pagan prophet Balaam, who was hired to curse Israel, but he could only bless Israel. Chapter 25 comes in riding hot on the heels of yesterday's blessing, and as we turn to look at God's chosen people who are explicitly blessed and protected by God, what do we find? The Israelites have run off and taken pagan wives for themselves. The wives have led Israel into idolatry. As a consequence, the Lord's anger burns against Israel and what seems to be a deadly plague. So what happens here? God commands Moses to kill all the leaders of Israel. Moses then commands the leaders to go ahead and kill all the sinners. And then Phinehas shows up with a spear, walks into a tent, and kills a man and a woman right there, caught in the act, by impaling them both. Phinehas is praised by God, and his actions are seen as having averted the plague or averting God's wrath from killing any more people. The chapter ends with God commanding Israel to go to war against Midian. So what's all going on here in this chapter? First things first, God is enthroned between the cherubim and dwells with his people in the tabernacle. Therefore, idolatry is not just sinful, but it is treasonous. When God's wrath burns against Israel, this is what any secular ruler would do to quell a rebellion. You know, if we had treason in our midst, we would go root out the traitors. Phinehas's act averts a plague that would have killed far more people. And so a lot of scholarship looks at it as that's part of what the praise is all about, is stopping the plague. But that leads us to another question. What do we do with violence in the Bible? And I'm not going to have a clear question for you on that or a clear answer for that, but I will have a lot of questions for us to ponder. First off, Jewish and Christian commentators from the first century have always felt uncomfortable with violence in the Bible. And many, going back to Philo and Josephus and the early church fathers, so Jewish and Christian scholars alike, they'll often allegorize or contextualize stories like this to make them less disturbing. This passage and many, many more will be and have been disturbing to readers, which brings us to the important question of interpreting violence in the Bible. Are these passages intentionally disturbing in order to confront us with the horror of violence? And that's where a lot of scholars arrive at, is that there is a tension there. Most readers experience this tension, and that the object of the story in the minds of the biblical author is for us to sit in uneasy tension with these stories. In our trek through Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, we have learned that in Numbers 25, hidden under the praise of Phinehas, that no matter how violent God's judgment is, this is what people are like, and punishment will never change it. It's a cycle of violence and punishment and sin that goes again and again and again, and it's not going to stop here. Are these stories here so that the reader will become exhausted by violence in the text and see it as ineffective in real life? That's another question to ask. So now moving on to chapter 26. But we will get back to violence in the text, especially as we go through Deuteronomy and Joshua. So chapter 26, this is a census of the people. This census is meant to be compared with the census from Numbers chapter 1. Israel could have entered the promised land 40 years earlier, but they were scared and complained that their enemies were too numerous for them. This new census is slightly smaller than the first census, indicating that it is God who leads Israel to victory and not their own abilities. Some tribes, such as Simeon, Ephraim, and Naphtali, Reuben and Gad, are smaller. Simeon, in fact, is less than half the size as it was in Numbers chapter 1. Some of the tribes are specifically linked to sin. An example is Simeon, who is specifically linked to the sin in chapter 25, where Israel runs off to the Midianite women. The census is a fulfillment of Numbers 14, 22 to 23, where God says, "None of the people who have seen my glory and the signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have tested me these 10 times and have not obeyed my voice, none of them shall see the land that I swore to give to their ancestors. None of those who despise me shall see it." And then in Numbers 26, it says, "For the Lord had said of them, they shall die in the wilderness." So not one of them is left except for Caleb and Joshua. And that is Numbers 25 and 26.